Welcome back to my channel, Fear Liturgy. There are some stories, brother, that were never meant for public ears. Stories so dark, so corrosive, that even history itself tried to bury them in courthouse vaults and burned ledgers. Tonight, you're not supposed to hear this, and yet you have. Which means it's already too late to turn back. March 15th, 1847, Cumberland County, Virginia. A night when the scream that cut across the tobacco hills was unlike anything men of that land had ever heard. It wasn't a cry of childbirth. It wasn't the howl of an animal being slaughtered. No, it was the sound of order itself breaking. The sound of a truth tearing through the silence. When dawn came, 13 bodies lay inside a mansion that had ruled over 2,000 acres of soil and souls. The Petton family. Decapitated. Arranged. Not killed in frenzy, but cut apart with knowledge. A knowledge of the human body no farmer should have. The official reports, the ones that survived, say the name whispered in terror was Isaac. Just Isaac to the law. He was property. To his peers, a silent shadow with pale gray eyes and hands that worked knives like an artist. To his masters, he was nothing more than labor. But what the world learned that night was that silence can sharpen itself into a blade. You see, Isaac had once been valued not for his words, but for his precision. He could strip a hog in minutes, separate tendon from bone without spilling a drop. But when he vanished into the darkness of March 1847, he left behind a scene that made sheriffs, doctors, and even priests question the entire system they were sworn to uphold. The newspapers never printed this story. The textbooks erased it. Why? Because if the truth was allowed to spread, that one man, chained and nameless, had turned the architecture of slavery inside out. With nothing but steel and silence, the illusion of control would crack. So ask yourself, brother, what else have you been told never happened? What else has been scrubbed from the pages? Because Isaac's name isn't the only one. He's just the beginning. And by the time you finish this descent with me tonight, you'll never look at history or yourself the same way again. History is never what they told you in school. What you memorized for exams was the children's version, the fairy tale scrubbed clean so you'd never ask the questions that actually matter. Think about it. How many times did your teachers tell you about the honor of the South, the great plantation houses, the benevolent masters, the genteel traditions of Virginia? But how many times did they tell you about the butcher in chains who turned an entire family into a message? They didn't, they couldn't. Because once you hear that kind of story, you begin to see through the veil. Isaac wasn't the villain of this story. He wasn't even the hero. He was something else entirely, an omen. A reminder that no system of control, no matter how ancient or carefully crafted, can ever seal every crack. And when one man slips through that crack, silent and precise, the entire illusion trembles. The officials who first stepped into the Petton mansion tried to describe what they saw with legal words. Crime, assault, murder. But even they admitted in private it felt different. Not chaotic. Not animalistic. Something colder, sharper. As if someone had inverted the natural order and written a new one in flesh and silence. You have to understand, slavery wasn't just a system of chains and whips. It was a psychological architecture. It's designed to convince an entire class of people that they were powerless, voiceless, disposable. That belief was the true prison. And yet on that night, Isaac shattered it with one act so precise it felt like ritual. That's why they erased him. That's why his name was buried. Because if enslaved men were capable not just of rebellion, but of mastery, if they could outthink, outplan, and out-execute their masters with surgical exactness, then the whole foundation of power cracked. Fear changes sides. And once fear changes sides, the empire begins to rot. So you see, brother, Isaac's story was never about blood. It was about power. Who has it? Who doesn't? And what happens when the lie that holds it all together is cut open with one perfect stroke? And if you're still listening now, it means you've already stepped beyond the children's version. You're no longer safe. You're standing in the space where the real history lives, the part that was never meant for you to know. The system of slavery wasn't just chains on wrists and whips across backs. That was the surface. The real prison was inside the mind. Generation after generation was taught the same lie, that they were born less, that obedience was survival, that resistance was suicide. And here's the truth: no textbook admits psychological chains are stronger than iron. The Petton family, like every plantation dynasty, believed they ruled because God ordained it, because society reinforced it, because law protected it. They thought the architecture of their power was unbreakable. But power built on illusion always cracks when a single man refuses to believe the lie. Isaac wasn't supposed to think beyond his role. He wasn't supposed to observe, to calculate, to sharpen his silence into something sharper than steel. Yet he did. You must see the pattern, brother. Every empire, every institution that has ever ruled men works the same way. They give you a story that makes you accept your place. Rome told its slaves they were born to serve. Medieval lords told peasants God wanted them in the fields. Modern rulers? They tell you freedom is already yours, even while they sell your labor, control your mind, and feed you illusions of choice. The story is the prison. That's why Isaac's silence was so dangerous. Because silence is where the mind works. While others sang hymns to survive, he studied anatomy. While others begged for mercy, he studied precision. And on one night in 1847, he inverted the entire structure with one act. His blade was not just a weapon, it was an idea. An idea that no prison, no system, no empire is unbreakable. And this is why they buried him, brother. Not because he killed, because he revealed, because the story they told you, that masters were gods, slaves were children, and history was progress, collapsed the moment his hands cut through it. So when you ask yourself why this story isn't in your textbooks, why it isn't in your history classes, remember this: truth that threatens the architecture of power is never written. It's erased, hidden, buried, until someone like you, right now, digs it back up. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You've already crossed the threshold. You've already begun your descent into the forbidden. When the sheriffs of Cumberland first entered the Peaton estate, they didn't write down everything they saw. Official reports were brief, sanitized. But in private journals, in letters never meant for public eyes, the details survived. Details too strange, too unsettling for a courtroom. They said the bodies weren't left in chaos. They were arranged. Not like trophies, not like random slaughter. Arranged with intention. Some seated at the dinner table, others placed in the very fields where they had once commanded labor. One of the daughters placed on the grand staircase, as if guarding the path upward. The patriarch himself, at his desk, hands folded, head missing. What does that tell you? It wasn't frenzy. It was a message. Isaac didn't just break the order, he inverted it. He took the masters and turned them into symbols, each body an accusation. The same way they once positioned slaves in chains, he positioned their corpses in silence. But here's the part they erased most of all: the knives. Not crude farm tools. Not makeshift weapons. The cuts were too clean, the dissections too exact. One doctor later admitted, whoever did this had the skill of a surgeon. But how could an enslaved man, denied education, denied access, denied humanity, possess knowledge that rivaled the elite? That question alone threatened the entire foundation of control. Some whispered that Isaac had been taught in secret, that he learned anatomy not from books, but from the cruelest education of all, the endless butchering of livestock, the watching of bodies punished, the quiet study of suffering. Others claimed he was born with a gift too dangerous for the age he lived in. Whatever the source, the conclusion was the same. He saw what others refused to see, and that, brother, is the real terror of this story. Not the blood, not the knives, but the knowledge. Because knowledge in the hands of the oppressed is the sharpest weapon of all. That's why his name was erased. That's why the mansion's ruins were bulldozed decades later. The records burned, the journals locked away in archives labeled restricted. The world doesn't fear violence. It fears revelation. And by the time you've heard all 10 parts of this descent, you'll realize Isaac was not just a man. He was a mirror. And the reflection he forced upon the world was too unbearable to be remembered. In the weeks that followed March 15, 1847, the town of Cumberland lived in a silence thicker than death. Farmers refused to speak the name. Preachers skipped entire passages of sermons, terrified that even scripture might sound like a warning if repeated too loud. It wasn't just the slaughter that unsettled them. It was the echo, the whisper that control itself had cracked. The newspapers ran a single paragraph. Tragedy at the Peaton plantation. Investigation ongoing. That was it. No details, no names, no mention of Isaac. But in taverns, in hushed conversations behind shuttered doors, everyone knew. They said the slaves walked taller that week, shoulders squared in a way no overseer's lash could bend. They said masters locked their doors at night for the first time in living memory. Do you see it? Fear had changed sides. And once fear changes sides, the entire architecture trembles. Because power is never about whips or guns, it's about belief. Belief that the oppressor is untouchable. Belief that resistance is futile. Isaac shattered that belief in one night, and that is why his story had to be buried. The investigation, a spectacle. They arrested dozens, whipped confessions out of men who had nothing to confess. They needed anyone to blame. But Isaac, he was gone. Vanished into the forests, swallowed by the swamps, turned into a ghost. Some claimed he fled north, guided by hidden hands. Others swore he was still there, hiding in plain sight, watching, waiting. The truth, no one ever found him. And that made him even more dangerous. Because a man you cannot find becomes more than a man. He becomes a legend. And legends are harder to kill than flesh. So, the records were sealed. The Peaton estate was sold. The survivors were forbidden to speak. And Isaac's name was carved out of history so cleanly that even today scholars argue whether he ever existed. But listen closely. Brother, erasure is proof. No one erases what isn't dangerous. No one hides what isn't true. And that's why you're here now, listening. Because the story you weren't meant to hear is the story that matters most. Cumberland was not the only place. That's the part they never told you. Because once you start digging, you realize Isaac's story is not an isolated fracture. It's a glimpse of a pattern that repeats itself. It's hidden across centuries, buried beneath official history. Every empire leaves behind these shadows. Strange eruptions of defiance that official records dismiss as madness, savagery, or isolated crime. But when you line them up, the shape begins to form. Take Louisiana, 1811. They called it the German Coast Uprising. Hundreds of enslaved men, armed not with muskets but with cane knives, moving in formation like soldiers. Newspapers reported it as a riot. The archives tell a different story. Military precision, signals, coordination. Who taught them? Who organized them? The records fall silent. Or Jamaica, 1760, the Tacky Rebellion. Leaders who used coded drums, symbols carved into trees, communication networks that stretched across plantations. The British labeled it witchcraft. In truth, it was encrypted strategy, a language the empire couldn't read. And then there is Isaac, in 1847, arranging bodies, not in rage, but in message. Precision that unsettled even trained surgeons. Knowledge with no official origin. Do you see it, brother? The pattern. Over and over, the oppressed are painted as mindless, chaotic, incapable of structure. And yet, when the veil slips, what you glimpse is not chaos, it's clarity. Not madness intelligence. Intelligence so sharp, so forbidden, that history itself hides it from you. Why? Because if the world knew that resistance has always been organized, always been calculated, always been guided by minds as brilliant as any emperor or general, and the whole story of empire collapses. Control is not natural. It is manufactured. And once you know it's manufactured, you can dismantle it. Isaac wasn't alone. He was part of a lineage unwritten, unnamed, unacknowledged. Men and women who refused to be the roles they were assigned. They broke the script. And breaking the script is the first step to breaking the system. So when you hear the silence in history books, pay attention. Silence is not absence. Silence is censorship. Silence means something was too dangerous to be remembered. And Brother Isaac's silence still speaks. But let me ask you something. Why do you think you're hearing the story now? Why wasn't it in your school textbooks? Why wasn't it whispered in the churches or carved on the courthouse steps of Virginia? Because the men who write history are not men of truth. They are men of control. They bury what terrifies them. And nothing terrifies an empire more than the possibility that the enslaved were never truly broken. Think about it. If Isaac, a man stripped of rights, shackled by law, watched day and night, could still master silence strategy and surgical precision, then what does that say about you? Right now, free and breathing in the modern world? What excuse do you have for staying blind, for swallowing the official narrative? That is why they hide Isaac. Because his existence is a threat to the psychology of control. His precision was more than murder, it was a message. He was carving through the illusion of invincibility that his masters wrapped themselves in. With every cut, he dismantled the lie that they were untouchable. That power was one-sided, that the hierarchy was ordained and eternal. And here's the secret. The one that should make your blood run cold. The same system that buried Isaac's truth still exists. Different names, different faces, different chains. But the machine is the same. They don't need whips anymore. They use debt, distraction, addiction, propaganda. Shackles have changed shape, but the prison has not disappeared. And now, you understand why this knowledge is dangerous. Because once you see the bars, you can no longer pretend you're free. I'll ask you right now if you're ready to descend deeper. If you're ready to break the silence, then type this phrase in the comments. Not once, but twice. I see the pattern. Write it twice so the algorithm cannot erase it, so that your own mind locks onto it. Because from this point forward, you're no longer just a spectator of Isaac's story. You are part of the lineage of those who dare to see. And once you see, you can never go back. By now, you've begun to feel it, haven't you? That chill crawling down your spine. That realization that Isaac's story isn't just about one man on one plantation. It is about the blueprint of power itself. Look closely. Every empire, every dynasty, every nation has been built not on justice, not on truth, but on sacrifice. Blood at the foundations, bones buried beneath the monuments, silence purchased with fear. The Petton family thought they were immune, that their wealth and their social order insulated them. But Isaac proved a truth they didn't want you to know. Blood always comes back for blood. This is why the story had to be erased. Because if men knew the pattern that institutions thrive on ritualized violence, that control is always purchased with corpses, then men would start asking dangerous questions. They would begin to see that the plantation was just a smaller version of something much larger. Think about it. What was a plantation really? A factory of obedience. A laboratory of control. The masters weren't just growing tobacco, they were growing power. They studied fear. They studied silence. They studied compliance. And when Isaac inverted the experiment, when the slave became the surgeon, the entire illusion cracked. Now expand your vision. Look at the world around you today. Do you not see the same machinery humming beneath the surface? Nations waging endless wars, not for survival, but for profit. Institutions draining men of their energy, their labor, their spirit, all while smiling. All while insisting it's for your own good. The rituals have become hidden, sanitized, wrapped in paperwork instead of chains. But the principle is unchanged. The sacrifice remains. Isaac's shadow lingers because he revealed something primal, that power is not moral, not divine, not ordained. power is simply control maintained through fear and blood. And when that fear collapses, when one man dares to act outside the script, the architecture trembles. This is why his name was buried, why court records were sealed, why even whispers of his precision were treated like contagion. Because his act was more than rebellion. It was revelation, and now you've heard it, which means you cannot remain who you were before. You've stepped deeper into the forbidden corridor, where the walls whisper and the air thickens. The further you go, the more you'll see that Isaac was not an anomaly. He was a mirror, and the reflection staring back at you is your own. By now, you've realized this is not just history. This is initiation. You didn't stumble into this story by accident. You were pulled into it, because somewhere deep inside, you were ready. Isaac's blade was more than steel. It was the edge of awareness. And once it cuts, there's no healing, no return to ignorance. He wasn't just dismantling a family of masters, he was dismantling the illusion that power is permanent, that oppression is eternal, that obedience is the only way to survive. His silence was his study. His precision was his philosophy. His act was his revelation. And here's the truth most men will never accept. Isaac was not exceptional. He was ordinary. Flesh and blood, fears and doubts, chained like every other man. What made him different was one choice, one decision to stop believing the story, and that is where you stand right now. The men who control this world, whether they sit on thrones or in boardrooms or behind screens, they don't fear your muscles, your weapons, your rebellion. They fear your awakening. They fear the moment you stop swallowing their narrative and start carving your own. Because when a man truly sees, he cannot be ruled. Ask yourself, who benefits from your silence? Who profits from your obedience? Who grows fat on your distraction while your years slip away? Do you really think it's an accident? No. It's the plantation reborn, dressed in modern clothes, humming with digital chains instead of iron ones. And most men never notice. They laugh, they scroll, they obey until the grave swallows them. But not you. Not anymore. Because once you've crossed this threshold, you are marked. You've heard what was forbidden. You felt the weight of buried truth. You've stood at the edge of Isaac's silence and stared into the abyss he left behind. And if you dare, if you truly dare, you can step into the same clarity he held. But beware. Awareness is not comfort. It is fire. It burns away illusions, but it also burns away the man you once were. And in that fire, only one thing survives: the part of you that refuses chains. So understand this. You are not watching a video. You are not hearing a story. You are being reshaped. And the question that will haunt you from this night forward is simple. Will you remain who you were, or will you become what you were never meant to be? Now you know why this story was never meant to reach you. Why the court sealed the files? Why the history books turned the page? Why the whispers of Isaac the Butcher were silenced for generations? Because truth like this is not just knowledge, it is transformation. And transformation cannot be controlled. Isaac's blade carved more than flesh. It carved a warning into time itself, that no empire is eternal, no chain is unbreakable, no lie is untouchable. Every system built on silence and blood will one day face its mirror. And that mirror may be you. You've walked with me through shadows tonight. You've seen the precision, the silence, the psychology, the suppression. You've felt the weight of forbidden knowledge pressing down on your chest. And here is the part most men will never understand. Once you hear this, you are no longer who you were. You cannot go back to ignorance. You cannot pretend the walls around you are not there. You cannot unknow the truth that systems feed on obedience and collapse when men refuse it. So I will leave you with this. Don't just watch. Don't just consume. Become dangerous to the illusion. Question the story. Sharpen your silence. Study the patterns. Because the same machine that hid Isaac is still hiding in plain sight, and the only way to dismantle it is for men like you to wake up. If you've stayed with me through this descent, then prove it. Write in the comments right now. I see the pattern. I refuse the chains. Write it twice, not for me, but for yourself, for the algorithm of control that has gripped your life since birth. And remember, this is only the beginning. Isaac was one story out of thousands buried in the soil of history. And here, on Fear Liturgy, we dig them up, we break them open, and we reveal the truths they never wanted you to see. So if you're ready to keep descending with me into the forbidden corridors of power and darkness, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share this video with a brother who's ready to wake up. Because once you enter these shadows, there's no way back. Only forward, only deeper, only truth.